ideas, and then everyone goes back to work. And the reality is things getting tougher, not easier. More regulations, rising taxes, burden after burden loaded on. Yesterday, the government talked a good game. More jobs, higher wages, stronger growth. But its actions tell a completely different story. This morning, the ONS told us that GDP has contracted. We have more regulations, higher taxes, all of the things that make it harder, riskier, and more expensive to hire anyone. But I also know that under the Conservatives, you had similar complaints. It may not have been this bad, but I know you weren't happy. And I know you weren't happy because when I was business secretary, you told me so. So I'm not a career politician. I didn't start my life working in Westminster, I can assure you. I started at age 16, actually, working at McDonald's. I'm sure there are some former McDonald's employees sitting in the audience. You don't need to be shy. There are so many of us. And then I worked as an apprentice, actually, to pay my way through university. Most of my career, however, was in wealth management. I worked at Coutts, mostly as a systems analyst. And many of you will remember what banking was like after the financial crisis. There were endless meetings about TCF and KYC and the CCA and MiFID I and MiFID II. And I woke up one day and realized that I wasn't working in banking or tech. I was working in compliance. And I did not like compliance culture, not just because it was boring, and it was. There was a lot of pointless box ticking that warped business to serve government instead of serving customers. So many, many years later, when I became business secretary, I put my loathing of compliance culture to good use. For example, in 2023, I scrapped a whole load of incoming corporate audit regulations that would have punished well-run companies, while the worst offenders would have found ways around them. And lots of businesses quietly thanked me. Only one complained, because they hoped to earn millions advising on these regulations. Business needs to focus on innovating, not profiting from bureaucracy. But we have built a system where the good guys are punished with red tape, while the bad guys simply ignore it. A system where entrepreneurs are punished for taking a chance, and capital is leaving the UK for more competitive markets. How did we get here? Let's start with the truth. Britain is facing two crises, one economic, one political. Last week, I gave a speech explaining that a morass of regulations, domestic and international, mean that we struggle to control our borders or build homes. Today, I'm talking about the economic crisis. Our debt interest is well over £100 billion a year. Welfare spending is out of control. The state is bloated. Productivity has flatlined, and the economy is stuck in first gear. We have 28 million private sector workers supporting 28 million others, 13 million retirees, 6 million public sector workers, and 9 million simply not working. Pay is stagnant. Inflation has nearly doubled in the last year. Unemployment is at a 4-year high. People are looking for a way out. And in the past 12 months, London has suffered the greatest exodus of wealthy people of any city in the world, except Moscow. Labour's interventions, like the employment bill, could cost the UK more than £10 billion a year in lost economic growth. And that has an impact on you. It's harder to raise capital, increased costs mean you can't grow, companies are nervous about going public. But this also has an impact on your clients, your employees, your supply chains. Many of you invest in SMEs and scale-ups. You can see what is happening. Hitting one area of the economy knocks over another, weakening demand across the board. So how did we get here? We forgot that business is a good in and of itself, and it pays for everything. It is the source of our prosperity. The challenge all of us in this room have now is that many people don't believe this anymore. They think business hoards wealth and doesn't create it, that it is greedy and it needs to be taxed more and more. This is a crisis, and the question before us is simple. Who has credible solutions? And I know many of you will be asking, why should we trust the Conservative Party? And I say, because no one is making the argument for business anymore except me and my party. We are the natural party of business. The Conservative benches are packed with people who've actually built things. The Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, he founded a business, expanded into the US, and then sold it after creating many jobs. Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffith has serious boardroom experience. He is one of the youngest ever FTSE 100 finance directors. He also chaired a FTSE 100 company. Across our party, you will find entrepreneurs and business leaders who know how to create growth because we've done it before. And for too long, we've been caught in a loop where politicians want to make tough choices, or don't want to make tough choices, I should say. Everybody wants to know how their problem will be solved this week, but no one's securing the 10-year horizon. And the truth is, we're at a critical moment. People are feeling real pain. Cost of living is going up. High bills, low pay, high taxes. They need a way out. But the crisis isn't just in the numbers. It's in the mindset. Just look at yesterday's spending review. Gone is the political imagination to even consider a future where the public don't hand a greater and greater share of their hard-earned money to the state for little improvement to the country. And too many in politics think growth comes from government, from regulators and central planners. I don't. I never have. Government debt is unsustainable, and the bond markets have already noticed. The bond vigilantes are circling. If Labour think they can pile on more borrowing, more spending, and more tax without consequences, they're deluded. There is a significant risk of a debt spiral, and no one can say we weren't warned. There's a gap in the market for a serious centre-right plan, one that understands the power of the private sector to transform lives, one that raises aspiration and delivers higher living standards. That is the space that I fill. But you don't need someone just diagnosing problems. You need solutions. So the first step that we will take when we come back to government will be to reverse some of the mistakes Labour has made. In particular, increasing taxes that don't raise revenue, but do real, serious harm. You and your customers will know just how damaging increases on family farms and family businesses have been. You may not know, so I will say it here, say it now, and I'll say it again and again. Conservatives will reverse Labour's changes to APR and BPR. We will also remove the VAT Labour put on private schools, a counterproductive measure to spite the rich, which has instead hurt hard-working families. Private school pupil numbers have fallen by more than 11,000 in England, 4 times more than the government forecast. Now the state sector has to provide extra places it never planned for. The expected revenue will be less, and at the same time, teacher numbers in state schools are falling because the schools can't afford national insurance increases. Anyone who has ever heard of the Laffer curve could have predicted this. Labour have not. This is the politics of pessimism, the politics that has exhausted the possibility that things can improve. With Labour, it's the politics of envy, focused on redistribution. With Reform, it's trying to recreate the past by nationalising utilities. So what are we doing instead? We are rethinking business taxes in our policy renewal programme, and we want the business community to help us shape a better alternative. We're launching lawfare commissions to dismantle the legal and regulatory barriers that stop people from building, investing, and growing. Take, for example, the planning documentation for the Lower Thames crossing runs to 360,000 pages, and the application process alone has cost £297 million. That is more than twice as much as it cost Norway to actually build the longest road tunnel in the world. This is crazy. So what is the Conservative Party under my leadership about? That people should be judged on what they do, not their background, or how much money they make. Benefits should be earned, not given. We want a state that does fewer things but does them well, that enforces the rules, protects our borders, defends property rights, and creates a climate where business can thrive. So we will reduce spending. And talking about reducing spending is not about austerity. Those of you who heard the Today programme this morning would have heard me going in a loop with an interviewer who didn't understand that there are other ways to reduce the size of the state and that not everything the state does is public services. It's about a smarter state. So we will slash pointless regulation that drives up costs, we'll end the constant reporting burdens that waste your time. And I know you've heard this before, but I did it when I was in government, I'll do it again. Just this week alone, we heard news that more UK-listed companies are seeking listings elsewhere. And yet the FCA was obsessing about diversity reporting. This is not serious. When I was in government, I resisted them strongly, and under my leadership, we will put an end to regulatory overreach. We will reform a welfare system that pays too many people not to work while employers can't find staff. And yes, we will cut taxes, but we will do it responsibly. So my message to business is this. I'm on your side, but I need you to be on mine too. You can't sit back and hope that someone else is coming along to fix this. You need to speak up. You need to support policies that back enterprise, and you need to challenge those who want more state control. Don't just wait for other politicians to do it. You need to get on the pitch too. And this isn't just about tax rates or red tape. It's about the country that we want to be. Not a Britain of committees and consultations, but one where people actually have the freedom to build, to create, to grow. So bring us your ideas. We're in opposition. Now is the time for us to get them. Let's hear your policies, your real-world solutions, not just the things that are going to be great for your business but bad for everybody else, but the things that are going to be good for the whole economy. This time, we are not shutting business out. We are bringing you in. And you can trust me because of my personal record. That when it came down to it, I stood up for business in government, not just in opposition. And you know my principles. You know I'll do it again. So back us, tell your customers, speak out, put your name to the cause, because we're not going to turn the country around with quiet applause. We need action. To be quite frank, we need an army of people who know the truth, that it's not government or politicians who create growth. It's business. It's you.
Kemi, thank you so much. I think we now turn to some press questions. The first one, Daisy at The Times.
Thank you. The NHS now represents nearly half of public spending. The Resolution Foundation says we are at risk of becoming a national health state. Is it too big? And if you want a smaller state, as you say you do, don't you have to tackle that?
It is a conundrum. I remember coming into Parliament as a brand new MP, and we were talking about how we were giving the biggest amount we'd ever given to the NHS, the record funding. And we've been doing this again and again. I mean, who remembers the side of a red bus that said we're going to give the NHS £350 million more a week? Many people don't know that we did that. We did do that. And yet still, we're not seeing the returns. We've put more and more money in, and we're getting less and less out. Waiting lists, people wanting to have their appointments, ambulances arriving in time to pick people up. Those things are not improving. So something is wrong. This is not just about money. That we're putting more money into the NHS as ever before. Labour did the same thing again yesterday, but they haven't explained how and why it will be better. And I think the public out there know that. We need to start talking about productivity reforms, public sector reforms. Right now, the private sector is having to squeeze and tighten its belt and save and cut its cloth according to its size. And nothing is happening on the public sector side. Labour has a lot of friends in the public sector. That's where they've all came from. I talked to you about my shadow cabinet. We've all come from the private sector. With Labour, it's trade unions and charities. The only ones we know who worked in the private sector were Rachel Reeves, and half her CV turned out not to be quite right. And Louise Haig was stealing mobile phones when she was in the private sector. These are not serious people. We are the serious ones. Thank you.
The next question is Sam at Sky News.
Sam at Sky News. Kemi Badenoch, what do you think about fiscal rules? What do you in particular think about the last Tory government's fiscal rules, and what do you think about this one's fiscal rules?
Well, the fiscal rules are there to show that we are being responsible with public finances. It shows how we're balancing the books. Now, when Rachel Reeves was campaigning to get into government, she said that she would keep those fiscal rules, and then she loosened them. She fiddled them, as we say in Parliament. I think people just want some honesty. It's not about trying to change rules. It's about what it is you're trying to deliver. And you need to be honest and you need to be consistent. There is no consistency right now. She's got no more headroom. So at some point, either the fiscal rules are going to be broken or something very serious is going to happen. And what we want to talk about right now is how we can just change the whole system. What we're seeing with what Labour announced yesterday is what you tend to see at the end of a government that's been there a long time. When you come into government, you should be starting with exciting reforms, lots of legislation, lots of bills. Most of what we're doing in Parliament is general debates, just having chats about things. There is no serious legislative program to transform this country. So the fiscal rules, when you think of it in that context, are a sideshow. They're just cutting and slicing. We'll put a little bit from into the NHS. We'll take it out of this department. They're moving things around. They're not trying to increase growth. And a lot of their behavior is the behavior that assumes that growth is just going to be there. And it's about how we slice and dice the pie. And what we're saying is that the growth that we are used to expecting just naturally is not happening. And we need to change everything. That's really what we have to focus on now.
The next one goes to Henry at BBC.
Hi there. You made clear that you're very concerned about government debt. So of the capital projects described by the Chancellor yesterday, what proportion do you support and what proportion do you oppose?
Many of the capital projects that she talked about were things that we were doing anyway. So for instance, nuclear. We're very happy to see more investment in nuclear. If people don't know what my position on net zero is, it's that the plans that we had for net zero were impossible. We're not going to deliver them unless we have a lot more nuclear. It's quite expensive at the moment. I'm not sure that everything that they've put down is feasible. But what I'm really worried about is where is the money coming from? No one's talking about this. The debt crisis, as far as I can see, is something that's it's coming. Something serious is going to happen unless we figure out where that extra 100 billion that we overspend by is coming from. And I'm not saying that everything was perfect under Conservatives, but we did cut the deficit every single year until the pandemic. When inflation increased under the Conservatives, it was after we literally paid everybody to sit at home and do nothing, and after a war in Ukraine that stoked inflation because of energy prices. What's Labour's excuse? Inflation has doubled in the year that they've been in office, and that really needs looking at.
Catherine, GB News.
Thank you. We're not getting growth. The government's trying to invest to bring that. But since the financial crisis, we've had very lacklustre growth. Living standards pretty much flatlined. The Tories were in power for 14 of those 17 years. So shouldn't you be apologising not just for what happened under Liz Truss, but the whole economic record of those 14 years?
Quite a lot of those 14 years, we did some very good things on the economy. That's how we were able to pay for the pandemic. The last few years were difficult, mostly because of the result of that, but also because there is a mindset that just assumes the growth will come, and what we need to do is figure out how much more we spend on the public sector. That has to change. What the people in this room want is not apologies, they want a plan. What are we going to do to fix the economy? And so much of what we're doing is actually holding business back, saying you can't do this, you can't do that. And you're talking about governments creating growth. Catherine, government doesn't create growth. I'm really sorry, but politicians don't create growth. You have Nigel Farage out there talking about nationalisation. That means politicians running industries. I don't think anyone in this room thinks that is sensible. We need to start getting serious. This is not a serious conversation where we're just pretending that everything is fine and it's just because governments need to put a little bit more effort and it'll be okay. We need to unleash animal spirits. We need to get people investing in the UK. That means creating a proper competitive business environment. It means competing with the EU, not just copying every single thing that they do. It means making sure that when people come to this country, that their investments are protected. They like the fundamentals we have here. The rule of law and so on. But right now, people are giving me all sorts of reasons about why they don't want to come to the UK. And it's not just because capital markets aren't deep. Many of them say because they're worried about their mobile phones being stolen while they're walking up and down central London. That needs fixing. We need to start looking at law and order, controlling borders. All of these things have an impact on making sure that we are a place that people want to come to live and also to invest.
Martin at the Daily Express.
Thank you, Kemi. you've said that Nigel Farage wants to take us back to the 1950s, Keir Starmer 1970s. I think I read this week that your favourite movie is Back to the Future. So if we were all to jump into the DeLorean together now and head to the 2030s under a Tory government, will we find that you've reversed the Labour's national insurance policy on businesses? And if I can quickly just ask you about Keir Starmer's deal with the EU over Gibraltar, is it another surrender by the Prime Minister?
Okay. I'll start with Gibraltar, so I can start thinking of Back to the Future, which you know is my favourite movie. The Gibraltar deal I haven't seen the details of, but the First Minister of Gibraltar, Fabian Picardo, said that he was happy with it, and I do actually trust his judgment. I've met him before. My concern is that every time Keir Starmer signs a deal, it's never a good deal. We always lose out. He said he'd signed a great deal with the US. It wasn't a free trade agreement. It was the sort of tariff deal that even Liz Truss did in about 2021, 2022, and now it's unraveled. The same thing we saw with the one that he had with India. So and let's not even get to the Chagos Islands, where we're giving away £30 billion to also give away territory. And unbelievably, because of the money we're paying, Mauritius can now scrap income tax. I mean, wouldn't we love to be able to scrap our income tax? We're paying for other countries to scrap income tax. So I'm not sure about Keir Starmer's negotiating skills, but until I see the detail, there's not much more I can say about Gibraltar. But the First Minister has said that he's happy with it. On the longer point about what the 2030s could look like, what I said I wanted to do was just change the whole system. I mean, you all would have been frustrated by what you saw in government. You had a Conservative government, and you thought, why aren't we just, allowing business to really go for it? Imagine what it felt like being the business secretary and not really being in control of business policy, because the Treasury controlled everything. The 2030s should be a time when we break Treasury orthodoxy to think about the long term, not just the next year, or how much we're going to spend in 2-3 years' time. We've got to think more long term. So we will change the whole system. That's what these lawfare commissions and the other ones I'm doing on net zero and on immigration are about. That we cannot just assume that what worked 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago will continue to work now with just a few tweaks. That's what we've been doing for a long time. It's what Labour is doing. We'll tweak here, we'll add a little bit for policing there, we'll take a little bit, we just have to stop that. So it's going to be a revolution. That's what you're going to get from us when we come back.
Martina at the Sun.
Thank you very much. Kemi Badenoch, you say Labour's spending review shows the state is getting too big, too bloated. So can you name one department currently doing something the government should no longer be doing? Not an efficiency saving, but something the state should step away from entirely. And is there a single public service you believe would be better delivered by the private sector? Thank you.
There are many public services that could be delivered by the private sector. What we need to do is make sure the government does what only it can do and allow others to fill in the gaps. I can't defend the borders. I can't go fight a war as a private individual, private company. That's what we need governments to do. You ask, what should the government not be doing? It should not be spending what it's spending on welfare, where we're paying lots of people to sit at home, where 1 in 4 people are registered as disabled in our country. That cannot be possible. That's the sort of stuff I'm talking about. Our welfare state is too big. Government is not mummy and daddy. We need to get people off welfare and into work and stop bringing in loads of low-paid migrants or low-skilled migrants from across the world and bringing them here. This is a pyramid scheme, and it is ripping apart our social fabric. I was telling on a podcast on Monday how when I was growing up, I lived in Nigeria when I was a child, and the nurses that worked for my father were all coming to the UK, to the US. We are stealing medical staff from countries that need it to fill our NHS while we're not able to train enough doctors here. That is not fair. Something has gone seriously wrong. So when we talk about a revolution, these are the things I'm talking about. We can't just continue the way we are. We have to have a serious conversation about change. And what the spending review showed yesterday is that we're going to carry on with managed decline. I am not about managed decline. I am about reversing decline.
Martin at the Mail.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail. You talked about regulatory overreach on businesses. There's a report out today saying there's been a tripling of racial discrimination employment tribunal claims in recent years. They say the government should look at scrapping the Equality Act. With your experience as Equalities Minister, do you think that's feasible? Is that something that you'd look into? Thank you.
So there are lots of things that have gone wrong in terms of lawfare. I don't know that scrapping the Equality Act is actually going to fix many of those things. There are other bits of legislation that are causing these problems. Equal Pay Act, for instance, has bankrupted Birmingham Council. Next, for instance, is not able to pay its warehouse workers more because they're mostly men, and the female workers doing a totally different job were being paid less. This is the courts acting as the HR department for companies. That's not right. That definitely needs fixing. There is also a lot of misinterpretation of the Equality Act. I saw this in extremis, where the Supreme Court had to give a ruling on what a woman was, something that I never thought we would be asking up until a few years ago. The way that people have chosen to expand what is in legislation is part of the problem. We see it whether in the Convention of Human Rights and also in the way that equality legislation is interpreted. So these are the things that we're working on. The policy renewal program of why is it that you put in simple legislation and then it's then used to do things that the legislation was never intended, like deciding how much warehouse workers should be paid. That's what we really need to fix. And if it means changing the Equality Act or updating it or even scrapping it, let's see what our policy renewal programs come up with. But it's quite clearly not working as intended.
Thank you. If I may ask a few questions. So the starting point is a difficult one. We've been through a long period of shocks, punctuated by policy mistakes. There's a great deal of pessimism, self-esteem is low. Suppose we jumped into the DeLorean, leapt into the future, and things start to go right. What's the positive vision for the UK? How does government look? How does business look? How does the energy market look?
So I think we should start with energy. You mentioned energy. In my view, energy creates growth. Countries that haven't sorted out energy are poor, and those that have are wealthy. And it is completely crazy. They're certainly on for industrial energy costs. We are 4 times more expensive than the US. We are seeing advanced manufacturing, heavy manufacturing disappearing from this country. It's why we have issues with ceramics. It's why the steel companies are losing about £1 million a day. It's just not profitable. We've got to fix energy. So in the future, what I want to see is cheap and abundant energy, but that is still better for the environment. We need to move away from creating abstract goals like net zero, where a lot of money will be spent on things that aren't necessarily productive, and start talking about what it is we actually want to see: cheap, abundant energy. At the moment, what we're seeing when people are talking about innovation is just replacement. Once upon a time, when you were innovating, you were getting a new thing that was doing something that had never been done before. A lot of the innovation, especially around green tech, is not innovation. It's just replacing existing technology with something that's slightly different but using a different power source. That is not delivering productivity gains. So in the future, I want to see real productivity gains. I want to see the sort of things we saw where we moved from handheld telephones to mobile phones, not moving from a handheld telephone that works on petrol to one that works on electricity. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Real, genuine innovation. And that should be across the board. This is Britain, for goodness sake. We started the Industrial Revolution. We can do this. We have great universities. We have the rule of law. We have so many great fundamentals. And yet we're all holding back. Government is saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. It is creating a zero-risk environment. We cannot have zero risk. So much of what is coming out in legislation, and I see it as an MP, is each day someone stands up and says, I've got a great idea. A constituent came in and said something bad happened to them, so let's bring in a new law so that that bad thing never happens again. And yes, that might be right to a point, but the law of diminishing returns kicks in. And now we have so much regulation that's stopping anything from happening. You look at the regulators, it's zero risk. We have young people. It's not just millionaires leaving the country. We have young people leaving the country because they don't think that this place has opportunities for them. They can't start businesses. We've got to fix that. People should not be leaving London for Dubai. They should be coming from Dubai to here. That's the future that I want to create.
Look, in markets and in business, people understand zero risk means zero growth. Exactly. It sounds like, the current government, previous Conservative governments made a claim that there was no trade-off between economic growth and net zero. It sounds like you disagree with that view.
Fundamentally disagree.
I
fundamentally disagree, and I always did.
Which implies if economic growth is necessary to meet pension liabilities and to raise spending on defence in a sustainable way, then there must be a trade-off between net zero and meeting pension liabilities, and must be a trade-off between net zero and defence. What steps would you like to see very quickly to see an improvement in this situation, an increase in energy supply and a reduction in spending, in prices?
Right. So on net zero, I think I'll start off by saying that the way the legislation even came in was completely wrong. I'd been an MP for 2 years, and I sat in this debate and heard everybody congratulating themselves on how we were going to get to net zero carbon emissions. And I stood up and I asked, how are we going to pay for this? And the minister at the dispatch box waved me away and said, don't worry, the plans will come. By the time, I think about 2.5 years later, when we started looking at the plans, I was a minister and the plans didn't make any sense. It was all linear thinking. Well, let's decide how many heat pumps we're going to have to make people buy, and then we'll put in legislation to make them buy it. This is how the zero electric vehicle mandates came in. This is not how you do things. And it has now created a warped system. Of course, there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs in everything. In fact, I often say that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. But we are making the wrong trade-offs. We need to make the right ones, and we need to do it with our eyes open. If you want to have net zero, then don't lie to people that it's not going to cost any money and it's going to deliver lots of green jobs. There's this mantra that you often get with left-wing governments, we're creating jobs, we're creating jobs. You can pay somebody to break some windows and pay someone else to sweep up the mess. You've created 2 jobs. There's no productivity. Those are the kinds of jobs they're talking about. I want to talk about real jobs. And that is how we need to start looking at our economy. So you asked, what do I want to see in terms of improving the energy situation? I think we need to look at exactly what the mix is in terms of renewables and gas. We have created a very distorted sort of grid distribution system that actually makes energy more expensive. I'm not against renewables, but we are subsidizing something while closing down gas, which is actually quite efficient. Gas should be part of any sort of transition, so we need to look at what we're doing on that. We need to look at what we're doing in the North Sea. Stopping all these companies from investing there is terrible for our energy security, for example. We need to look at the levies that we're putting on people's bills. If you look at how the bills, how energy bills are distributed, the distribution costs, wholesale, green levies, all of those things can really be brought down. Let's get the market actually functioning, not creating artificial markets, delivering things that are not real productivity.
Turning to capital markets, as we know from our past experience and as the US demonstrates today, vibrant markets, certainly vibrant equity markets, are a great source of economic energy. They're also a great source of soft power, as the US sees with its Mag 7. But our markets have withered, certainly over the last decade. We see companies migrate, we see companies move out. Small companies that start in the UK, especially in tech, decide it's time to go to the US once they reach a critical size. Should we be thinking more carefully about how we can help our capital markets? And I'm thinking along the lines of stamp duty and pension reform.
Yes, that is the short answer. And this is not a new issue. I think we've been talking about this for about 10 years, at least that I can remember. And I always start this sort of question with, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What do people say is the issue? Why are they not investing here? What is it that people say? They say that the capital markets aren't deep enough, that you just have better, there's just more variety, more depth in the US, for example. They talk about our regulatory environment and how it's just not fit for purpose. They talk about regulatory overreach as an additional issue. And they talk about transaction taxes, the cost of taxes, whether it's on transactions or corporation tax, which has increased. We need to look at all of this as one. These issues are systemic, they're interlinked. And I'm not sitting here saying that we've got all the answers. We did try some things when we were in government. I remember us putting in bills saying we were using some of the freedoms from the EU. It didn't seem to make that much of a difference. So let's start again. Let's start fresh. This is what I meant when I said bring us your ideas. If you are sitting there waiting for politicians to fix everything, that's never going to happen. You need to get involved. We need all of you with your expertise, your insights, your experience to tell us this is what we need to do if we're going to fix this problem for the long term and for everybody, not just our particular industry or our particular business.
Perfect. Last one from me. In the intro, I mentioned two political stools, the Prime Minister and Mr. Farage, but the situation is difficult. The Conservatives are third in the polls, they're behind Labour in second, and Reform are in first. Perhaps the lazy view is if the economy does okay over this Parliament, Labour would be re-elected, and if it does badly, voters may take a chance on Reform, but the election is in 2029, probably 4 years away. What's the strategy? How do you find a way in to be relevant with a fighting chance come election time?
So it's to remind people that we have 4 years of Labour. You look at the way that the media talks about the polling, and you would think that there was an election next week. In December, I spoke to Pierre Poilievre, who was the leader of the Canadian Conservatives, the leader of the opposition in Canada. He was 23 points ahead. Last month, he lost his seat. We live in volatile political times, and what we need to do is make sure that people understand what our offer is and why it is better than the other two. There is time, there's not that much time, but what I'm not going to do is what those other parties are doing, which is not telling you the truth. We have to tell people the truth. This is the harder way. It's a lot easier to do what Nigel Farage is doing and saying, here's my magic money tree and shaking it all around. But that is not honest. Or we're going to increase benefits, we'll nationalise everything, we'll raise the personal allowance to £20,000. That's already several hundred billion that he spent. This is not real stuff. And Labour tried to do the same thing. They've now got into government with no plan, just assumed that once the Conservatives disappeared, everything would be fine. And things are getting worse because they had no plan. What we are doing is working on a credible plan that will actually work. It's not going to be easy. It probably can't solve everything. We're going to need other people to help us solve problems. Government cannot do everything. This is one of the things I say again and again. But that there is time. But we cannot, in my view, allow Labour to get away with saying that they're the only option and this is the only way this managed to climb, or allow Farage, with no experience of legislating, he's never in Parliament, let alone government, to just come in. Can you imagine 360 random people suddenly taking over government and saying they're going to fix everything? We were there for 14 years sweating and labouring. It was unbelievably difficult. How many of you would allow your businesses to be run by people who'd never been in that business before and say, yeah, come on, I'm sure you can fix it? That's what he's offering. It's not real. It is a scam. And it's my job to expose that scam.
Well, I think there's a lot in there for us to think about. I certainly hope that the UK will be working better than a DeLorean over the next few years, but I suspect, keep the nuclear power maybe in there. But you've been extremely generous with your time. Thank you for answering so many questions. I'd like everyone to invite you to say thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.